Lord Baron, he said again, edging closer so that he was within touching distance of the Blood Angel. You are wounded? He heard the words fail as they came from his mouth. What was he trying to do? What was there to do at this moment? He turned his head to look at Stina. The word growled through the air. I cannot. Katsuhiro turned back, looked down at the mangled lump that was the angel's head. Skull and flesh and helm blurred. Red bubbles popped, jelly-soft lumps quivered. I cannot see. Lord, my name is Katsu. I know. I recognize your voice. You are under my command. Katsuhiro heard the breath gurgle out with the last word. He thought of the moments he had seen the Blood Angel in the last days or weeks, always a fleeting glimpse. He was not sure he had ever heard his own name spoken in Baron's presence. I am under your command, Lord. The angel took a great breath that shook his frame. Red froth from the helm and from holes in the armor. A stump rose. There were just a finger and a thumb at the end. Katsuhiro did not know what will or strength drove it, but the remains of the hand suddenly had him by the front of his uniform, pulling him closer. You, gasped Baron, you did not flee. Katsuhiro shook his head, opened his mouth, but the angel forced more words out. You will hold this section. Katsuhiro blinked, swallowed. He did not know what he had been thinking to hear from the mouth of such a warrior in his last moments. Not this, came the answer. Baron's back arched as he took another breath and raised his voice, so that it was heard again, loud and strong enough to jerk up the heads of the other troops behind the firing line. Follow this one, he said. Katsuhiro found his head was shaking. I am giving an order, called Baron, still loud. Katsuhiro went still. He was suddenly cold, the weight of what was happening and what would happen next waiting for him after these few moments of life had passed. He found he was thinking of how long ago it had been and how far he had come since he had stepped onto this section of the Marmac South line. It felt as though that tiered wall and that time was a long way away, but it was not. It was not, because here was Baron beside him, and that meant that this must be the same section, that the rubble and firing lines and scrap trenches were the parapets and bastions he had stood on in the past. He had moved very little. It was the world that had moved. He looked up at the clutch of filth-stained soldiers close to them. He wondered how many of them had been there on the morning he and Stina had climbed the steps, and he had looked out and paused at the light of the dawn in the distance. Some, perhaps. They all looked like nothing and no one he could recognize. He guessed that neither did he. Yes, Lord, he found himself saying to Baron. I will die for... He found the word he had wanted to say falter, but something in the remains of the angel moved and Katsuhiro realized it was Baron shaking his head. We all die for one another in the end. Then there was a last great shiver, and the mutilated hand gripping Katsuhiro released its grip. He did not move. He could not move. Only look at the stillness that had been a thing of wonder and terror and strength. He wondered what he should do for a long moment, and then stood, pulling his rifle up and checking his pouches for ammunition. He thought of the man with the gun who had got off a macro train in another life. He looked at his hand. It was shaking. That would have to stop. He couldn't shake, couldn't do anything that would let those around him find a reason to do anything but stand and fight. To use us, he gave his angels. The words ran in his head. Stina, and you, he pointed to another of the troopers nearby. What's your name? Jacobus Solex, said the trooper, clutching his lasgun tight. Albia, 1st Sappers. Make a sweep down the line and check for ammunition, Jacobus. You, and you. Another jab of his finger at two others crouched figures. Run the line south and link up with any unit in the next section. Find out if they have command infrastructure. If they do, update that this section holds. They moved without hesitation. Just like that. He almost smiled. He was moving now, standing, turning to look at the distance where the next wave would come from. He protects, he shouted, and turned to look at the other troopers. He protects, called one. Not loud, but with enough strength to carry. Then another echoed the call, and then another, and it was loud now, voices calling out in released fear and rage and defiance. He protects! He protects! He protects! Katsuhiro nodded and looked at the dead angel, whose grave would be the wasteland that he had bled his last on. As we protect him, he said to himself.